What's good, YouTube? Hope y'all doing well. So in this video, I'm going to show y'all all the methods that I use to make my beats go from a beginner level to professional, and I'll be trying to be as comprehensive as I possibly can, so be sure to stick all the way to the end so you get all the gems. And I think that's enough said, so let's jump right into it. So before I hop into it, I want to categorize the beat into 4 different elements. The first being sound selection, the second being your patterns, the third being your mixing, and the fourth being your arrangement. And each of these categories have little subcategories. So the general basis of improving as a beat maker is you kind of pick one of these different categories or one of the subcategories within it and really focus in on those and hone in that. Let's say your MIDI patterns are lacking, specifically your drum patterns. For the next few weeks or the next month or two, what you want to do is really get your drums dialed in, or this could be with anything else. This could be with your arrangement, adding in transition sounds, getting your master track right, sound selection. Honestly, it could be for anything, but the main thing with this method is you want to first identify a weakness, really hone in on which thing you want to improve on, and just spend a bunch of time practicing that. And also just kind of a pro tip with it, if you are making like melodies or you're throwing drums on stuff, you might as well just finish the beats and just get practice in on those other categories. It'll help you improve a lot faster. That's enough yapping. Let's just jump into the project file. So I've got this project file right here, and I have a 8-bar loop made in this beat. And so I'm just gonna show y'all what that beat sounds like just as is. Off rip, it don't sound very impressive. I'm not even gonna sit here and exaggerate it. With this exact same MIDI, I've literally taken all of that and I've turned it into a beat that sounds like this. That kind of takes us into our first category, which is sound selection. And honestly, this is the most paramount thing when it comes to making good beats, especially if you want to make professional quality beats. You've got to have professional sound quality. That is one of the most important things. And I'm not sitting here saying you got to go and spend $1 million on plugins. That's not what I'm saying with this. Work with what you got, work with the budget of what you got. But you got to do some digging. You've got to do some research. Just be ready to really experiment around and just be really patient when it comes to getting your sound selection right. So let's just start with the piano melody here. I just have the default FL keys, and I just made a layered melody here in F minor, which is just F, C, and F. So by itself, it just sounds something like this, which is cool, but this is kind of uneventful. So I went ahead and copied a couple notes up here and just made like a little counter melody up there. Overall, this is not a super complicated MIDI when it comes to an entire sample here. This is probably the most complex part, which is just this top part right here. And it's really just a super easy and repetitive melody. I've only made the first 2 measures and just copied it for the remainder. And for the most part, it's literally just 1 measure, and I just changed a couple notes in the second half. So again, by itself, this melody doesn't sound all that bad, but it just sounds really one-dimensional. Honestly, this is a strategy within itself where you could just make your entire melody in a basic sound like a piano, and then you could just copy out the notes and put it into other sounds. That's what I did for this beat, just for the sake of demonstration. But the first thing that I did, I took these 2 bottom notes specifically. I grabbed this incumbent one-shot. It's like this dark sounding string. I got it from my my Ignite multi-kit, and all I did was just drop those 2 bass notes into there. So just get like a real dark and gritty sounding string. Then I took this little piano section right here, and I wanted to add some more width to this sound. So I went ahead and I got a pad from Electra X, which is pad number 8 in the Ghosts in Space Bank by HZE. And that by itself sounds something like this. And then lastly, I went ahead and took the top melody here, the repetitive top melody, and I dropped it into a key from Electra X. It's also from the same Ghosts in Space Bank, and it is the bell number 3 sound. Like I said, I've shaped the entire melody using the exact same MIDI from that previous pattern. Overall, in terms of MIDI, it's really simple, but you can tell that the sound selection has really taken it a long way, and it's only 3 instruments. So, and these 3 instruments pretty much fill out the entire thing. Me personally, I don't like to have a lot of sounds, but the sounds that I do have, I like them to fill out the space. And that kind of takes me to my next point. One of the most key things with sound selection is you don't want your sounds to interfere with each other. And what I mean by that is you don't want them to be in the same frequency range. So I'm going to go ahead to each of these instruments and just open up an EQ, and you'll see that most of the main frequencies don't really sit within the same range. So for the EQ on the top melody, it looks like this. Most of these frequencies kind of sit right here between about, I don't know, like 500 to about 3000 hertz. For the pad, most of these are a little more wider out. There is still some of that concentration in the same area as the pluck, but it's wide enough that it doesn't interfere with it. And then of course for the low notes, that mostly takes up this lower area, and there's also some stuff in the highs, but it doesn't really carry out enough to interfere with the rest. And also as a bonus, I threw in this little bell in just as like another counter melody. And so if I open up an EQ onto that, you can see that that kind of sits within its own range. I mean, for the most part, a lot of these sounds sit between the low mid and the high mid range, but notice that their peak frequencies don't really sit within the same range. So they can overlap a little bit, but as long as that they're not all in the same kind of range. So for example, like if I drop this an octave and I move the string up 1 octave, then everything's gonna sound kind of jumbled. I mean, it sounds okay, but it sounds a whole lot less spaced out than if you had everything how it was previously. So basically what I'm getting at is sound selection can take you a long way, and it's honestly the prerequisite for having professional sounding beats. If you have bad sounds, whether that's with your melodies or drums, which is what I'm going to cover next, it's going to be really, really difficult to have good sounding beats. Let's go ahead and kind of showcase the drums a little bit here. So the original drum pattern sounds like this. And with that drum MIDI, it's the same exact MIDI from the other one, but I chose different drum sounds, and it sounds like this. You can tell just with the rest of the drum sounds, the MIDI being pretty good already, but putting it into quality drum sounds makes a world of difference. All I really did was I had a basic 2-step hi-hat right here, the kicks, the basic clap or snare that you have there, an accent snare, and then this was a cowbell, and I just turned that into a perk. But literally this is all the exact same MIDI, copy paste, like word for word. Look, the kicks are the exact same. Obviously these snares are the exact same. The counter snares are the exact same. The perk hits on the same spot. Open hats, the exact same spot. Only thing that I really added to this was an 808 pattern and also just 4 hi-hat rolls. Everything else, MIDI-wise, is the exact same. All I did was just change the drum sounds. If you're wondering where these drum sounds are from, all of them except for the kick are from my Resonance multi-kit. So if you're interested in that, I'll have a link to that in the description. But there's lots of places where you can get good drum kits. There's a lot of places on YouTube where you can get really solid ones, especially if you want like a specific type of sound. If you want your drums to sound similar to stuff like on Hardstone Psycho by Don Toliver, you could look up a Don Toliver Hardstone Psycho drum kit. And so you can get really specific with that. There's a lot of cool drum kits that YouTubers put out there that are free. You can kind of play around with those and get some quality drum sounds through there. Some of them even have one-shots and samples and stuff. And to wrap up the sound selection bit of this goes beyond just finding the right plugins or finding the right drum sounds. This could also mean designing your own sounds in plugins like Serum. I'm not going to get to that in this video because that's just a little too much. Or other stuff like sampling, where I have quite a few sampling tutorials. I'll link one of those in the description if you're interested in seeing more of the process behind that. But overall sound selection, if you don't have good quality sound, the beat is just not going to sound good, and you've seen a perfect example of it right here. The next thing I want to talk about, which we've already kind of covered a little bit, is the pattern side of things. And basically what I mean by this is, how do you get really quality MIDI patterns, especially with your melodies. I'm gonna be honest, the drums kind of figure themselves out over time for most people. I would draw more emphasis onto getting really good melody midis. The easiest way, in my opinion, to really get comfortable with this is just picking a really basic sound like a piano and just kind of figuring out how to harmonize notes, what spacing you kind of want, how to build basic counter melodies, things like that. I can't really explain it too well in this video, but if you want somewhere to start, the easiest way is probably just learning one scale, one minor scale or major scale, and just making your beats using that. For trap beats, ideally probably a minor scale. Just learn some basic music theory, playing around and experimenting around with different counter melodies, with the same instrument and with other virtual instruments is probably the best way to go in terms of really honing in your melodies. I'll go ahead and show y'all an example of a pretty quality MIDI and a more, I guess, amateur version of it. And so it's just this really repetitive chord melody, little basic top melody here, and some bass notes that pretty much just repeat the root notes of the chords. If I'm just kind of breaking this down from the start, we just start with just a basic chords melody here. And so this is more or less kind of easy to construct. All you're really doing is just drawing in these bass notes here and just filling them out with chords. So to start with, this is what my melody sounded like. And so all I really did was just build basic minor triads onto these, just basic chords. And this is where music theory is a little bit helpful in constructing these chords. If you know the F sharp minor scale, it's just easier to just kind of fill these in. You could just start by doing this, is you just go F sharp, you copy the note up 7 half steps, that's the next thing. And then in the middle somewhere is another note, which makes your chord. Chords sound more full or just a little more professional. A few things you can do is you can make 7th chords. So basically all that is you're just adding notes in the scale just above this. You can copy notes up 1 octave. And you could also move stuff down. There's lots of different ways you can make variations to this. This one I just wanted to keep it simple, so I just kind of kept it as this. And if you want to make this sound a little more realistic and less like you clicked it in, so if I quantized everything, it would sound like this versus strumming it. Just adds like a minor detail to it. To strum it, all you do is hit Alt-S on Windows to open up the Strumizer menu. These are just the settings I like to use. Like I mentioned earlier, to add some more depth to this, you can just use the same piano sound and just add some bass notes, and these are just the same thing as the root notes up here, but I just copied them down an octave, and then I copied these down 1 more octave and lowered the velocities a little bit, and those sound like this. And so pairing that with the original. So just adds a lot of depth to it. But MIDI wise, you're not really doing much. You're just moving stuff down an octave. And now here comes the fun part. This one, in my opinion, is a little bit hard to explain, but the best way is you just kind of play around with notes and just figure out honestly what sounds good. With this, again, you don't really need music theory, but it just helps to know some. You're just gonna be kind of playing notes within the scale, and that just helps you build out the melody here. Again, I can't really explain it too well. You just gotta practice it a lot. Again, I can't really explain this too well, but this just comes with practice. I would say you could start off by trying to mimic top melodies in songs, and you'll kind of get a feel for what sounds good. And to add just a few more layers to this, this goes a little bit hand in hand with the sound selection again, but I just went ahead and grabbed this bell from my Ignite multi-kit. Since we already have a lot going on melodically, we don't really want to add too much, but this is just kind of a basic counter melody for the top. And more or less, all I'm really doing is just kind of keeping the same rhythm for both halves of this, but I'm just changing the notes around. You can hear that there's a little bit of that overlap between the two patterns, but we still leave plenty of room for it. Tying it in a little bit more to that sound selection, I took that same exact chords MIDI and threw it into an E piano to add some more depth to the mids. And then to add some more depth to the bass, I added a bass guitar from the Ignite multi-kit. And then this starts to kind of throw in the elements of accent melodies. This can be in the forms of, in this situation, a lead guitar, vocal chops, some guitar accents, any other sound effects like a brass or strings or anything of that sort. But in this situation, I ended up using some vocal chops, both from arcade and vocal runs. Putting it in context with the original piano melody, it sounds like this. So this was one of those beats where I used a lot of different stems for, you know, something that doesn't sound quite as complicated. I just wanted to showcase a little more of kind of how to build some of those melodies from the bottom up. For time purposes, I can't really go too much into depth, but the big thing is just practicing. Picking up a little bit of music theory doesn't really hurt. I think that kind of wraps it up for the melody section of things. Now we can move on to the drum patterns section of things. The hallmark of this, honestly, is at least for trap beats, is your 808s, your hi-hats, your snares, and kind of, you know, your perks, open hats, arguably in that order. I'm just going to show y'all some examples of beats that I have on my laptop that have really complex patterns. Honestly, a lot of these, in my opinion, are a little bit overkill, like if you're trying to make placement ready beats. But if you're just trying to get better, there isn't really too much wrong with being overkill, because if you get really good at doing stuff that's way too much, the simpler stuff becomes a lot more refined and a lot easier to do. Basically what I'm trying to say is your drum patterns don't got to look like this, because they might be a little bit too complex for what you're doing, but it's not a bad thing to be over the top. So I'll just show y'all the beat. I'll show y'all probably like 2 or 3 different beats, but this is the first one. So in terms of like complexity of the pattern, the hi-hat's doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. And there's a couple methods to which you could do this. You could just place down a note like this, and you could extend it and then hit Alt-U on Windows, and you can play around with the time multiplier knob and just, you know, get the right amount of chopping. You know, that's probably the easiest way to do it, beginner-wise. Me personally, what I like to do, and this is probably not the most efficient way of doing it, is I like to get the hi-hat, like, you know, when you put in like the basic 2-step here. And what I'll end up doing is just select one of these notes, and I'll select the brush tool and go to the top, and I'll just select, you know, one of these chopping settings and then just paint in the roll like that, which honestly is probably a little less efficient, but it's just the way that I do it. And that pretty much goes for your hi-hat rolls, your snare rolls, both more or less use the same thing. So I'll show you an example of that with the snare rolls here. Also, before I forget, I don't think I did either of these drum patterns, or if I did, I like kind of touched them up, but my boy Spaceboy Taj is the one that actually did these. So shout out to him. I'm just kind of using his work as an example here. So again, for the snare rolls, it's more or less the same thing as your regular hi-hat rolls. You could just, you know, make a long note, hit Alt-U, and just adjust the time multiply. I would say for trap beats, the snap to grid setting that's probably the best for snare rolls is 1/6 beat. And you can see that's what we used on this beat right here. And if you want to make even finer chops of that, you could do a 1/3 step, which is basically just 1/6 beat cut in half. You can use 1/2 step or 1/4 step. And again, you just got to play around with that. The best way to learn kind of what works well, what doesn't, is start by kind of trying to mimic stuff that you hear in songs, like with big trap rolls. The first song that comes to mind for me is Big Time by Lil Baby and Future. I think it's off of a DJ Khaled album. But that's got some pretty cool snare rolls. If you can make something like that, that would be probably ideal if you can mimic that. And then once you get there, you can kind of experiment. When it comes to 808 rolls, again, more or less the same thing. When it comes to the chopping, you use like the 1/6 beat. It's probably the easiest thing to do. You can make some cool rolls with the 1/2 step. Just kind of play around, see what works well. You just got to really experiment and practice. That's what's going to come down to. One more cool thing that you can do with your drums is going to the note pan, and you can kind of just play around with these. So you can kind of pan these from side to side. So that's just another cool trick if you want to pan your rolls left to right. More or less, that's kind of the whole thing of it. You just got to practice. I'd say the easiest thing is just try to mimic some drum patterns that you've heard in some songs, and just try to get the exact same sound. And it doesn't have to be the whole pattern. You could just try to figure out what one specific roll sounds like, you know, or one little section of it. So that kind of takes us, before I jump into the next beat, one more tip. Please, 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 for everything, make your 808s in key. It's a joke, it's a running joke, and it is for a reason, because out of key 808s will literally ruin beats. Going into the next beat, this one's a little bit more focused on developing drum bounce between multiple different elements. So this is mostly showing off like the hi-hats, snares, perks, those types of things, and how they interact. So go ahead and just looking at the first set of sounds here, we just got an open hat, chant, another open hat, another open hat, some snares. Basically what I'm getting at with this is you want to have enough space to where all of your drum sounds have a pocket to where they can fit in. You don't want to do too much. You can layer drum sounds, that's fine, but you don't want to be doing too much with the drums. Even this beat is honestly doing too much for the drums if you're trying to get this placed, but this is just more for the sake of example. So notice how everything kind of fits together here, and there's plenty of room for everything to hit. So be conscious of that when you're making your drums. Don't put too many things in one spot. You know, have things spaced out. Don't have things hit right after each other all the time. And again, that will just kind of come with practice, but you can see it visually there that there's kind of at least like half a measure or a measure gap between all those different sound effects. And you can hear that with a beat. Like, it sounds like it's a lot of drum sounds, where there's a variety of drum sounds, but they don't compete with each other. Alright, I think I've been sitting on the patterns part of this for forever now. It's time to move on to the next thing, which is mixing. So ideally, I'm not going to get too much into specifics here, but the mix is one of those really key pieces that makes your beat sound a lot more professional. I'm not going to go into depth. This is not going to be a mixing tutorial. I'm pretty sure I have like 2 or 3 on the channel, so I'll leave something linked in the description if you're interested. For the most part, you want to have a mix where everything has its own space. That way you have enough room for all the drum sounds to have their shine, and for the 808 to hit, and for the melodies to still sound powerful. Again, I'm not going to go into too much depth on this, but one of the most key things is EQing. A lot of melodies will have, mine's included, will have excess frequencies in this low mid region. This one doesn't really have that much, so it's kind of a bad example, but so there's like a little bit right here, and a little bit right here. So sometimes I just go through and just take an EQ here and just hold control and click and drag and sweep through to see if there's any frequencies which are a little bit overwhelming, and I'll just kind of dip those a little bit. As for the mix leveling, you want to have your 808 be the loudest sound, 808/kick, depending on if you're using a kick or not. Then your claps and your hi-hats will be the next loudest things. The snares will be right after that, and then after that, like your open hat, perks, all that kind of comes towards the end. And then for the master track, usually what I put is the EQ that boosts up the highs and the mids. Default soft clipper, you can play around with this and get some really cool shapes out of it. You know, that's up to you. And then typically what I like to do is use Maximus on the Master Aid 1 preset, go to the band section and adjust these till it sounds good. So I'll show y'all what this sounds like just leveled without the master track on. Sounds pretty good. And with the master track, just adds that extra punch to it, draws more power in the mids. Alright, so now I'm going to go to the last part of this, which is your beat arrangement. Everything that I've discussed in this video is really important in my opinion, but this, I would say, is not absolutely paramount, but it does definitely help to kind of get a general feel for what works as a good beat structure. This isn't absolutely law, this isn't what you have to do, but this is just a good place to start. Typically what I like to do is get most of my melody sounds here at the beginning. Maybe we could take out a counter melody, take out the pad. And so you're gonna have an intro with just a few sounds. Then you're going to have your chorus or your hook, which is gonna play pretty much majority, if not all of your sounds in that 8-bar loop. And that'll be for 16 measures. Mind you, these measure amounts are in double time. So if you're in normal time, you would have it for 8 measures, your hook. And then for your verse, you're gonna take a couple melody sounds out. You can take a drum sound out if you want. Kind of swap these in and out. And if you want to add a little more bounce, if you want to add a little bit of difference to your drums, you can kind of cut out some hi-hats here and there, like right after a clap. And you can go in and just kind of take out bits of patterns here and there, like with your snares or your open hats. And another thing, if you want to add some variation to your melodies, is you can copy your main melody up and then make it unique by clicking on the top left and then just clicking make unique or the letter M, and you can pitch it down 1 octave. Or you could pitch it up an octave, whatever works. You could also throw different effects on it, like halftime, portal, an EQ that has some automation to it. So I'll go ahead and show y'all like an EQ version of this. So let's say we cut out these lows. If you want just like this section EQ'd, is you go to your mixer track and right click on the EQ here. And it could be any effect. It could be, Effectrix, portal, halftime, whatever. You can go create automation clip and you have your automation clip here. But we don't want it for the entire beat, so I'm gonna move this over, make this unique, and pull this all the way down. And on top of all this, you can throw in some transition sounds. I've got a few from the Resonance kit that I'll just kind of show y'all. You could throw in a little one of these right here. Or like a riser crash. And you can kind of sprinkle these in throughout the beat. And to go back to the structure, basically you're just going to take what you have here, which is intro, hook, verse, and you're just going to repeat it. And right here in the middle is going to be a bridge. And all this really is you're just going to have a slightly different version from the intro. You get out a little sub bass in there. Whatever you want to do, you can just play the main melody with the 808. Just create like a little break. And just go right back into the same, the same thing where you have 16 measures of chorus, 16 measures of verse, and kind of rinse and repeat this whole thing. And that's like the basic arrangement. I know I kind of went off on a tangent. I'm a little all over the place, but yeah, that's kind of, just like a few things that you could do arrangement wise that can make your beats sound a lot better. And so yeah, that's pretty much going to do it. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. I hope y'all enjoyed it and hopefully found it pretty helpful too. The thing that inspired me to do this video is I've been doing a lot of beat critiques live on stream recently, and I've been giving out a lot of feedback to a ton of different subscribers on their beats, and I feel like this video would be pretty helpful in terms of helping a lot of y'all that are kind of newer to making beats. So like I said, that's all I had for this video. I appreciate y'all for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.